Thank you, Joy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's really an honor for me to be here amongst such an illustrious audience, and also amongst veteran journalists, because it reminds me of the time when I was sort of dabbling in the media, together with some journalist friends in Indonesia. We wanted to establish a magazine that voiced the opinions of the Southeast Asian people. Perhaps some of you know that in Asia there was a very popular news magazine called the Far Eastern Economic Review, which died. And when that magazine died, there was a void in independent journalism in the region. So we wanted to create this magazine. It was a tough battle because in the end, we weren't able to make it into a viable economic business, and then so it died. But then, since then, we're now trying to revive it. The same principles, but online. And so we're hoping that with this new technology, we'll be able to better share with the world what we in Southeast Asia believe and feel about the developments in our region. But I'm not here today to talk about my brief experience in the media. I'm here to talk on behalf of Transparency International. Now, I'm sure many of you in this room already know who we are, but in case you don't, we are an international, a global movement, a coalition which tries to fight corruption. We work together with civil society, we work together with business, we work together with governments. And we have 100 chapters around the world working with us to ensure that effective measures are in place to fight corruption so that there is no place in this world for corruption. Now, goals 16 and 17 are very important to the work that we do, because in our opinion, these are overarching goals. They are very important to be able to achieve what we are trying to achieve, because without peace, without justice, without strong institutions, and without fostering partnerships, it is impossible to achieve any of the sustainable development goals that we want to achieve. In particular, that is relevant to us is target number 5, which is target about bribery. Bribery and corruption. We have to work together so that by 2030, the number of bribes, the amount of bribes that we as an ordinary citizen has to pay to the public sector is reduced. Measuring it is not easy, admittedly, but we have what we call a global corruption barometer. And the 2013 edition of that survey, we found that more than 1 in 4 people in the world had to pay a bribe within the space of 12 months when they had to interact with key public institutions and services. The saddest thing is that the institutions meant to protect us, the police and the judiciary, are the ones considered to be the most corrupt. The pillars of our democracy, political parties, are also considered very, very corrupt institutions. So this is what we have to try to achieve together, how to reduce the amount of bribes and corruption that prevails in the world. For example, the goal 4, which is related to free, equitable, quality primary and secondary education for all, is a target that we all aspire to. But yet today, we still see a lot of school buildings which are unfit for purpose because construction funds have been siphoned away. We have instances of teacher absenteeism, ghost teachers, because there's no money to pay them. Budgets have been mismanaged. Or instances where people just have to pay a bribe to get their child in school. This is what we are up against. But as you all know, corruption is not just about bribery. We need to have a broader understanding of what corruption is if we want to achieve our goals. The abuse of power by the few to benefit a small group, but at the expense of many, causing harm to individuals and society, often still goes unpunished in this world. Now, such grand corruption, it involves political elites, senior public officials, and in many cases, the private sector also. We can think of several examples. To name a few, former President Viktor Yanukovych of the Ukraine. And then there's also Obiang of the Equatorial Guinea. And then most recently, the case of the elites in Azerbaijan, who have siphoned off an estimated $3 billion out of the country, allegedly to buy political influence in Europe and to launder their international image. In my own country, Indonesia, the Anti-Corruption Agency is investigating a major case. We have a national priority project, which is the use of the electronic ID cards. Now, these electronic ID cards are very important to us as citizens because it also is supposed to have been used for our elections, for our voting process. But 40% of the budget for that project has been squandered by politicians, by public officials, and businessmen through various corrupt means. These cases could not have been exposed without access to information, without a strong, free, independent media, and without competent, dedicated, investigative journalists. So freedom of information is really not just about the right to information, but it is also about how to be able to access relevant, timely, accurate information so that we, the ordinary citizens, are able to understand it and to use it. I have one example of our chapter in the Maldives. They have been able to use their right to information to address the goal 13 related to strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity in the face of climate change. From 2011 to 2016, the Maldives received over $168 million for mitigating measures. Our chapter, because they took advantage of this freedom of information, was able to track the use of these funds. Now, to their dismay, it turned out that on one of the islands, the funds were used not for dealing with the issues or the impact of climate change, such as the lack of clean water, public facilities that were inadequate due to rising sea levels and changing temperatures, but instead they were used for installing LED lampposts. This is a simple example of what we can do with information, or what we can do with the access to information in monitoring our governments. There's another goal that is related, which is very important to the work we do, and that is goal 4, related to reducing illicit flows of finances and the recovery of stolen assets. The impact of the implementation of the right to information on this particular goal is that we now have laws mandating the disclosure of beneficial ownership of trust funds and companies. As the Panama Papers have shown, the anonymously held shell companies that are widely used by the corrupt, by criminals, by those tax evaders, have been very useful for disguising illicit transfers of ill-gotten gains. Having public registers of beneficial ownership would make it much harder for them to do so, and would make it also much easier for us who are fighting against corruption to track how funds are being used, to track where the proceeds of crime and corruption is being channeled. It is estimated that corruption, bribery, tax evasion is costing the developing countries an estimate of $1.26 trillion per year. I can only imagine how much good that money could have done in lifting the millions that we have around the world out of poverty. There's growing support for public registers, and including from the private sector. Now, this is a positive sign because the gatekeepers, the service providers, the implementers, all need to play a role in curbing corruption. Corporations need to join in the fight against corruption by disclosing their corporate actions. Are they implementing anti-corruption policies within their companies? Are they disclosing the details of their subsidiaries overseas? How are they being managed? Are they paying the taxes? What are the revenue sources? All this is part of the demands that we are also asking of the private sector, and their responsibility also in contributing to the fight against corruption. So corruption, bribery, they all pose clearly serious risks to us achieving the development goals. So we feel that the meaning and the purpose of Goal 16 and their targets should be understood as prerequisites for attaining the goals, the SDGs. They are prerequisites to create an enabling environment so that every interested party in realizing these goals can contribute in monitoring the progress and in contribute to achieving these targets. So every stakeholder, every party, every person working on SDGs needs to integrate the goals, the targets on bribery and corruption, and also on access to information into all that they do. Access to information must empower citizens so that they have a choice, so that they have a voice in creating the sound, strong, democratic, responsive, accountable institutions needed to achieve these goals, free of corruption, if we want to create a better world. And that, to me, is the essence of access to information. Information is only important if we know how to use it. Critical analysis, being able to relate it to your everyday life is the only way that we can benefit from access to information. Thank you.